Welcome to Season 4 of AIHA's podcast series, The Healthier Workplaces Show, where we explore timely and informative topics about occupational and environmental health and safety. I'm your host, Alejandro Castillo. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with industrial hygienist Lawrence Whitehead. Lawrence is a retired faculty member in industrial hygiene and environmental health for the UTHealth Houston School of Public Health. He has been teaching there since 1986. He directed the ABET-accredited graduate academic curriculum in industrial hygiene. He taught occupational health controls, occupational health field trips, public health ecology, and fundamentals of industrial hygiene. His research has primarily been involved with exposure assessments for epidemiology projects and studies of the need for professional industrial hygienists across industry. Today's episode is part of our Luminary Series. We're going to talk about Lawrence's 50 plus years in academia in industrial hygiene and environmental health. Lawrence, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. How did you discover OEHS and what made you become interested in this field?
It was kind of roundabout. I studied architecture as an undergraduate. I became interested in how buildings and cities might affect people's health. That led me into a double Master of Architecture, Master of Public Health.
Okay.
And that was interesting, but I wanted to go on into a doctoral degree, and there was no way to pursue that subject. So I sort of just shifted a bit into environmental health in the doctorate, and I was able to do research on potential microclimate changes in a newly urbanizing area near Houston.
Okay.
Very interesting. But the first job I got to go to was at the University of Vermont, and they had a large, they called it a lung center. It was a lung disease grant. And it became possible to set up a research project on worker exposure to wood dust. They had a lot of clearly woodworking industries in northern New England.
Okay.
And I had to tool up, learn a number of industrial hygiene dust measurement techniques, and even pick up how to do pulmonary function testing to put on this field study.
Of course.
And I found that very interesting. Also, frankly, there was more research funding interest in worker health and safety than in sometimes not clearly defined urban environmental health questions at the time. And so was able to complete a study of worker exposure to wood dust and whether it affected pulmonary function testing. And it was kind of roundabout, but
yeah,
that's how I moved from architecture through urban environmental health. But the first job I was on, many of the concepts in environmental health could move into worker health. I needed to learn specific techniques of measurement and the like.
I always like to ask this question because everyone who I ask how they got into this field, it's never, I wanted to enter this field at the first time. It's very much so niche, and they just somehow find it. And I think your story is just a perfect example how you also just found it as well.
I think a lot of people in my generation in occupational health, industrial hygiene, may have somewhat similar stories. I was not by any means, despite how much white hair I have, the first or maybe even the second generation of people in the field, but I knew quite a few of them who were senior as I was getting into it, and they came from a variety of different areas of specialty and found worker health and safety as a place they could apply the things they already knew.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit more about your teaching. You have over 50 plus years in academia. I want to ask you, how much has the field and the classroom changed since?
Well, the classroom has changed. It hasn't been that many years, but the pandemic utterly changed classroom teaching.
Of course.
At my school, we had 1 week to go virtual, to go TV based, and I'm sure practically every university, almost anywhere, faced the same things. We were somewhat fortunate at the UT School of Public Health in that we already had 5 campuses around Texas, and we already had what started as T1 line connections, sort of old-fashioned. There was a TV classroom at each location, eventually 2, even 3, and it wasn't internet-based initially, but the facilities were there, and by 2020, obviously that system had become internet-based, and all that was really necessary was letting students switch over to a virtual connection.
Of course.
And it may have gone more smoothly than at some schools, but in 1 week we were able to move an almost entirely face-to-face teaching system, but some of that was face-to-face over
of course.
Sort of a hard TV system into an internet-based teaching. Personally, I had taught for over 40 years at that point in face-to-face classrooms, so I'm a little old-fashioned. I valued that direct feedback and contact with the students. And I've since taught both pure online and in a setting where most people were on tiny images in the back of the room. And I don't like that, but I'll admit to being old style in that way. It still works, but...
Of course. But you want that interaction, of course. If someone has a question, you want to understand their curiosity, of course, not just a little small little dot.
Yeah, and when they're all there, I can kind of tell how the communication is working. I can't tell that when there's 20 people in small images on a big TV, but in the back of the room, which was about 2/3 of my class last fall, which was the last class I taught.
And what did you teach in these classes?
Well, the large majority of this time I taught industrial hygiene in general, but typically this was all in graduate school. The first introductory course for majors and often other people taking environmental health or at Texas even occupational medicine took that class. Over time I taught the controls class, which if IH people are watching this, they'll know what that entails. We did a lot. That's where we did our ventilation class and respiratory fit and things like that. And then we had a field trips course. That was fun.
Of course it is.
I first taught industrial hygiene at University of Michigan, and they had in their curriculum a course where the whole class would go to visit plants about 6 times in a term. And I just picked that concept up, and when I moved to Texas, took it down there. And in Houston, there are lots of industries, so it was pretty straightforward to set up field trips to a wide variety of plants and work situations. And I taught that for a long time and enjoyed that very much.
Glad to hear.
We got to go to all kinds of plants.
Is there one particular plant that you found to be very unique?
Well, NASA's giant swimming pool where they do all their zero gravity training by actually being immersed in water and everything being counterbalanced, so the astronauts are neutral buoyancy. Fascinating situation.
I'm jealous. That sounds super fascinating.
They would always have a whole space shuttle bay. I mean, this is a big pool. It's 40 feet deep and far long enough that they could put, they didn't bother with the wings, but they had the whole shuttle bay in there. And the astronauts had, well, their typical spacesuit, but rigged to work underwater.
Of course.
There would be as many as 15 or 20 divers in the water for every astronaut. You know, if they dropped a tool, the diver would go down and get it in the pool and bring it back. There were divers for rescue, which now and then they needed to get the astronauts out of the water fast. They might start. Well, I actually was present purely by luck up on the tourist balcony when one threw up in her suit.
Oh.
Potentially dangerous.
Of course.
So they did a crash extraction, but by the time they got her out of the water, everything was okay.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, very much so. That was a fascinating visit. A Dorito plant.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, fresh hot Doritos just had the flavoring shook on them, were delightful. And usually several chemical plants. Houston has a ton of those. So over the years, we got to visit a wide variety of plants. I love teaching that. Students liked it too. That part was especially enjoyable. Class liked it. In terms of the content of the curriculum, of course, anybody teaching a program wants to keep up with what's needed. I'd say the fundamentals didn't change all that much, even over that time period. I mean, you have the basics of air sampling, ventilation, of the concepts of gases, vapors, particulates, things like that. And so those didn't change a whole lot.
Take 20% off any of our top 10 e-learning courses now through June 20th, including Basic Principles in Occupational Hygiene, the recently updated Use of Direct Reading Instruments Certificate Program, and the recently updated Fundamentals of Toxicology. Remember to use code SUM25 at checkout to receive your discount.
What aspects of teaching or mentorship are you most proud of?
Oh, the graduates.
Of course.
No question. I tried to count up and really lost track. Now, we had both majors in industrial hygiene, but also in related environmental and occupational health areas. But of just the industrial hygiene majors, both at Michigan and mostly Texas, it's in the low hundreds.
Wow.
So there are people all over in a wide variety of jobs. There are people retired before me. And it's just, that's the reward. That's the rewarding part. All good-sized programs have graduates in all kinds of positions, and I'm just very proud that we do too. We have graduates in the national laboratories. They probably can't even tell me some of the things they're looking at and studying. Some of them, it took them 9 months of employment before they had a high enough clearance to go into certain parts of it. Or we have some graduates in the services, but all kinds in industry, of course, and a lot in healthcare. That's a big industry.
Of course.
And fairly risky in places. What we think of medications as patients are chemicals.
Of course.
And there are all sorts of exposures and ergonomic situations throughout the healthcare setting. And it happens our school is right in the middle of course, we're from Texas, claim it's one of the largest medical centers in the world. It might be. And we have graduates working in health and safety in just about all the major hospital systems around us physically down there in the city. So it's actually a big industry in terms of health and safety. And many people, civilians anyway, that is outside the health and safety profession, don't even really think about that.
Of course. And it might be a good thing that they don't think about it, because if they're thinking about it, something might be going wrong. So it means that you guys are doing your job correctly and keeping us safe, because we need you guys to keep us safe.
Very much so.
Yeah. I have to ask, and you can say no, but do you have a favorite student?
I will say no, but I'm very proud that this year's AIHA president is one of our graduates, Nicole Greasy. Not that every president of AIHA is one of our graduates, but the timing was perfect. She's in the presidency this year, and very happy to see that.
Of course. Can you share with me the research you have done and what you have discovered?
Well, I've mostly worked with groups in public health research, and I'd say the most frequent thing I've worked on was on the exposure side of epidemiologic studies, where the primary endpoint that was being looked at was some health outcome, or the possibility of a health outcome that involves some kind of workplace or environmental exposure as a possibly related cause for that. And a lot of them were workplace. And when you're, most of those are retrospective in the sense that we're now looking at a workforce that some of the members of which have some kind of health outcome. And the question is, do they have it to any degree because of where they have worked in the past? So it's not like you can go out and measure exposure now for those people. They were exposed in the past,
of course,
if they were exposed at all. So you reason from what job titles they had. Does the place they worked have any prior records of chemical exposures, noise exposures, things like that? Not so much noise for chronic disease, but several studies involved possible chemical exposures. So what someone like me might be involved with is looking at the old records from that. It's usually companies that have invited a study.
Okay.
There's no way to push your way into a company and do a study. It's usually the company, or sometimes a group of similar companies, want to have a study done to find out if something in the past, like working with a certain chemical they used to use, may have contributed to now the emergence of a health problem.
Of course.
And as to findings, well, they vary a lot. And I wasn't the primary investigator on these, but to participate in the team trying to help the epidemiology principal investigators have some knowledge about what might be prior exposures. A couple of them involved, not too surprisingly, about possibly past wood dust exposures, since I've done some work with wood dust previously. And that's kind of hard to estimate, but working from what their job titles were, what they worked with in terms of sawing, sanding, there's some knowledge about different amounts of dust produced by those things. And that kind of retrospective study often ends up with suggestive results, but not absolutely certain. But there've been a couple of those studies where past wood dust exposure could be involved, and it was supportive of previous, more direct epidemiology studies, and so that was good. I won't say they were themselves each an earth-shaking study, but you do enough projects, whether it's you or other people, evidence accumulates about specific issues.
Of course.
It's kind of the way that kind of epidemiology builds up over time.
Let's talk a little bit more about the future. Given the evolving nature of work environments, what emerging hazards or exposures do you think OEHS professionals should prioritize or look more into?
Oh, that's a good one.
No wrong answer, by the way.
I understand that, and it varies so totally across different places of work, different manufacturing lines. One of our students found a job right at the beginning of the pandemic with one of the companies making one of the vaccines. I honestly don't know what the individual worker opportunities for exposure were. I mean, that's so new, and I have not gotten to go into such a plant. But I cannot help but think that some of the ways they were making that vaccine, it was one of the mRNA vaccines, are just completely different from older vaccines. So my point on that would be new biologic manufacturing techniques that right now today we don't know.
Of course.
And possibly within only a very few years might emerge. I can think of a past example as fascinating.
Sure.
One of the plants in Michigan we got to take students to is a very large pharmaceutical company, and I think this is all entirely public information. They were trying to make a new blood pressure drug. A chemist spilled some on his arm, no big deal. Later, hair started growing there, and
Oh, wow.
they called it Rogaine, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
It wasn't an extremely highly toxic thing, except that in manufacturing pharmaceuticals, you have these chemicals in very high concentrations. The little pill that the patient later takes is a very small amount.
Of course.
But in the plant, they're, I can't guess, but 500 times more concentrated. So it's in that level a really hazardous chemical. If it spilled or got loose in the plant and exposed the workers. So pharmaceuticals, for example, have very different issues than just a bottle of pills of very dilute concentrations might cause
Reactions, of course.
yeah. So, and what that might pose for new drugs, new vaccines being made, I don't personally know, but it's a constant churn of new things happening. I'm trying to think. We talk a great deal about AI, and I think that's so new that we don't really understand yet.
Not yet.
It would be when AIs are running equipment, for example. Can we be yet, although maybe eventually we can, 100% sure that they will run it correctly. Robotics were not AIs, but a great deal of attention had to be paid to would their programming with certainty not take the robot in motions that would interact with people.
Of course.
And of course, they usually built fences around them, around the range of motion and there would be sensors that stopped the robot if a person moved into that area, all to be sure there was no physical safety damage.
Makes sense, yeah.
If an AI is given greater autonomy, then there needs to be greater certainty. People have talked here in our association about some of the current AIs writing, and they can make mistakes still, or solving math problems, which at times they can be very good and very fast at, but you need to be able to know they did it right. So I think we're kind of still at that stage, being sure the AI did it right.
We have to be sure.
And if it's a complex enough problem, we might not be able to tell yet.
That's true.
I asked an AI, oddly enough, can another AI tell when writing has been done by an AI?
Interesting.
And it arrived at the opinion of not always. I thought it was, I don't know, can an AI be honest as opposed to not? But it seemed a straightforward answer. In fact, I was almost joking with it, except I don't think they can joke, but except how they've learned to be responsive to humans. It's kind of fun, actually.
It very much is.
One
yeah.
is nothing too big as writing on it.
We talked about the present and a little bit about the future. Let's go back to the past one more time. If you can go back in time and talk to yourself the first day you started teaching, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, I would tell myself that at that point I did not perceive the university faculty environment correctly. And I should have, but where I was going to school was a little too relaxed. I mean, at the doctoral level. A little too easygoing. I don't feel I was taught how hardcore the drive for research funding is, even at that time, which is nearly 50 years ago, and of course has just gotten more so. Now, I made it through my career, for the most part, teaching, and at certainly at Texas, where good teaching and managing an academic program and largely contributing to group research, I was able to have a career there. but ask some of our faculty who are at places like Harvard, Hopkins, and any number of other schools. Today, and it's become infinitely worse in the last 120 days, the absolute pressure to obtain outside funded research in the top universities, top being those that are totally research focused, is huge. It's unending. It never slows down. I think the majority of the high-level universities, there isn't enough money to run them if there isn't a great deal of research money coming in. That's the model. It's an actuarial model. If a certain large fraction of exterior, mostly in this country, government research money isn't coming in, the whole financial model comes apart.
Of course.
Well, it was not necessarily, of course, until now, when many grants have been stopped, when and I'm not being political, this is a strictly financial statement.
Okay.
The ending of many sources of grants and the cutting of the so-called indirect cost that many people don't understand, but is an inherent part of large-scale grant operation, is stressing many universities very severely. I don't know what the outcome will be.
Time will tell.
Well, time will tell. It may not take very long. And I don't mean that as a political statement, because it is a factual statement right now. It may change in the future, back in the direction things used to be, but at present, it's the way things have been changed, and in universities, the pressure is huge. So there can be substantial changes very soon. I mean, by soon, I mean 6 months.
That's pretty soon, yeah.
Yeah. As the current fiscal year for universities, for the most part, runs through either June or maybe August. And what would have been the facts for the next fiscal year have changed radically. So I can't even predict for many places, many schools, what it will be. And that's excruciatingly true for programs in industrial hygiene and environmental health, given that NIOSH has for 47, 48 years funded training grants that largely, the large majority of that went to student scholarships. And we all know this, and they are ending. So it's going to be a big deal for industrial hygiene education. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's sat here with you and pointed this out. I don't honestly know how the number of graduate programs will be affected and how the number of graduates will be affected.
As we approach the end of this episode, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I've enjoyed the heck out of a career where I got to do quite a bit of teaching, and I've enjoyed doing it in industrial hygiene and environmental health very much. My few holdover architect friends scratch their heads and say, What? What have you been doing? Well, they know what I've been doing. How did you end up there? And if they have a few minutes, I could explain it. It's still, architecture, buildings are an environment, although the designers of those think of them very differently. It all relates at one level. So I had a good time.
It's great to hear.
While I wasn't watching, years passed. So it's been all right.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for hosting.
Absolutely. That wraps up today's episode of the Healthier Workplaces Show. To learn more, visit the AIHA website and follow us on social media. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, remember that healthier workplaces means a healthier world.